It's 4:15 a.m. in a psychiatric ward in Berlin. I lay curled in a fetal position, facing the yellowing paint of the wall. Suddenly, as my brain succumbed to a desperately needed moment of sleep, I was shattered awake by the sound of a colossal explosion. The blast was so intense that it sent a shockwave through my body, and in the liminal moments between sleep and wakefulness, I listened to it echo in the darkness of the ward. I looked around in panic, blinking the fragments of sleep and confusion and fear from my eyes. Nothing was damaged, nothing broken, no smell of smoke, and no sirens in the distance. As terrifying as it was, the realization dawned on me quickly. It had never really happened. The explosion was in my head. Brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bat Country. As unscientific as the name makes it sound, exploding head syndrome is real. Exploding head syndrome is an obscure sleep disorder characterized by sudden loud bangs, like thunder or explosions, that occur during sleep transitions. The earliest potential description of the condition dates back to the middle of the 19th century, when the British neurologist John Hewlings Jackson wrote about sudden sensory disturbances. His primary area of research was epilepsy, which he described as the name for occasional, sudden, excessive, rapid, and local discharge of grey matter. His work in this regard is foundational, and while he wasn't talking specifically about exploding head syndrome, when we translate the phrase a local discharge of grey matter into more modern language, like a sudden and abnormal burst of electrical activity among neurons, he would ultimately be proved right, in theory, about the phenomenon. A more detailed account of exploding head syndrome, or EHS, dates back to 1876, when Philadelphia physician Silas Weir Mitchell published his paper on some of the disorders of sleep in the Virginia Medical Monthly. Mitchell described the case of a patient he called Mr. V, who experienced a sense of a pistol shot or a blow to the head. Mr. V complained of a noise in my head, which is sometimes like the sound of a bell which has been struck once, or else I hear a loud noise, which is most like that of a guitar string rudely struck and which breaks with a twang. The condition is giving a passing mention in 1920 in Robert Armstrong Jones's description of psychiatric patients going through terrifying nighttime experiences like loud bangs in their head upon waking, or, in the doctor's own words, a snapping of the brain. But exploding head syndrome wouldn't be given its current name until 1988, when neurologist J.M.S. Pierce published a study of 10 patients in The Lancet and followed up with a more comprehensive account a year later, in which he gives the testament of a further 40 people who have experienced the condition. It was these two papers which led to a proliferation of interest and understanding in the condition. Pierce begins his 1989 paper with the case report of a healthy 74-year-old woman. This woman had a previous history of migraines with light sensitivity and vomiting, which began in her 40s and ended in her 50s. She describes being wakened by a sudden bang in the head, as if my head was bursting with a flash of light over both fields of vision, after which I would be dazed for a second and come round, terrified, my heart thumping. There was no pain, just a frightening sense of explosion. Pierce notes the woman was afraid she might be having a brain hemorrhage or a stroke. His research was simply to start the discussion, and he offers little in the way of interpretation and much less of treatment. In fact, he admits, "It is entirely benign and I suspect quite common, but underreported. What causes the bomb-like noise remains a mystery, and I know of no vascular or hydrodynamic changes in the brain which cause comparable symptoms." But start the discussion he did, and today there are many serious studies into the phenomenon and theories which, surprisingly, seem to support John Hewlings Jackson's conjecture from 250 years earlier. 2015 saw the publication of one of the largest studies ever into EHS by psychologist Brian A. Sharpless. While Sharpless's study focused on college students in particular, he was able to extrapolate wider trends. He discovered that 18% of people would experience exploding head syndrome at some point in their life, that gender is not a factor, that there is an association with sleep paralysis. People who had experienced sleep paralysis were twice as likely to also experience exploding head syndrome than those who did not, and that fear and panic was reported in every single case. Sharpless has continued his research into the subject and appears in several later papers too, as the theories about the causes have become based in more and better data. It wasn't until 2025 when the condition was finally recorded in clinical conditions. A 55-year-old Japanese woman suffering from depression, who had reported several incidents of exploding head syndrome per week, was connected to a polysomnography machine. A PSG machine includes measurements for an electrooculogram, electromyogram, airflow, nasal pressure, rib cage movement, oxygen saturation, electrocardiography, and, most importantly in this case, electroencephalogram, the electrical activity of the brain. This dramatic chart is the result. In the moments before wakefulness, at 3:30 in the morning, this patient experienced a massive and apparently unprovoked surge of electrical activity in her brain, with all the subsidiary measurements peaking as a result. It is the first independently documented evidence of exploding head syndrome. What's more, this was the first study definitively linking exploding head syndrome and the transition either to or from REM sleep. The cause, though, remains a mystery. There are three primary theories: a malfunction in the brainstem's reticular formation, a mini seizure, or an auditory processing dysfunction. Theory 1. Brainstem reticular formation malfunction. Based on the new evidence available, researchers speculate that the cause of EHS lies in the brainstem reticular formation, an area of the brain that regulates sensory motor reflexes, eye movements, motor control, and transitions between sleep and wakefulness. The theory is that as we approach sleep, the brainstem acts as the last man in the office, switching off those functions as the brain succumbs to sleep. In exploding head syndrome, this routine is somehow disrupted, resulting in wild brain cell firings that cause the perception of loud noises and flashing lights, as well as muscle spasms. Theory 2. Mini seizure hypothesis. Some researchers believe exploding head syndrome may involve brief, localized bursts of neural activity, particularly in the temporal lobe. This theory describes the function of EHS rather than the cause, but it can be imagined as a micro-seizure, similar to epileptic auras that don't develop into full seizures, but manifest as a sudden auditory hallucination, such as an explosion. Theory 3. Auditory processing dysfunction. Since many people who report exploding head syndrome also report conditions like tinnitus, there is some circumstantial evidence to support the idea that a misfire in the auditory cortex, which processes sound, might result in the perception of a loud noise that didn't really happen. Not quite an auditory hallucination in the sense we understand it, but nonetheless, processing a sound that did not occur. There is, in fact, a fourth theory to which less study seems to be devoted, and it's this theory that made me want to talk about exploding head syndrome today, because of my own experiences with it. I have personally experienced it 5 times that I remember. Once while withdrawing from alcohol at home, once in a psychiatric ward in medical detox from alcohol, then twice in quick succession while withdrawing from selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and the most recent one, about 6 months ago, out of the blue and in complete sobriety. Exploding head syndrome has been anecdotally and clinically linked to withdrawal from certain medications and substances, especially those that alter brain chemistry related to sleep and neural excitation and inhibition. While formal studies are limited, case reports and clinical observations suggest a connection. And the Japanese woman whose electroencephalogram we saw a moment ago was taking clonazepam, among other medications. Alcohol, benzodiazepines, and SSRIs like fluoxetine, which is what I was taking, have all been linked to exploding head syndrome. A noticeably large proportion of people in recovery from drug or alcohol addiction have told me that they've experienced it too. Poor sleep hygiene, sleep apnea, sleep paralysis, and exploding head syndrome all seem to be related, and all of them occur in withdrawal. If you have experienced any kind of withdrawal, especially with exploding head syndrome, please let us know in the comments and give us some context. The mechanism for withdrawal-induced exploding head syndrome is unknown, but it's likely that when GABA, a kind of calming neurotransmitter, drops during withdrawal, our neurons can fire erratically, especially during the onset of sleep. This process is, after all, largely responsible for the hallucinations that some of us experience in very severe alcohol withdrawal. Whatever the cause, the science can never do justice to the terror of the experience. I can personally testify to how frightening it is, and, like the 74-year-old woman described a moment ago, my first fear was also that I was suffering a stroke. As a result, for those of us who have experienced it, the fact that exploding head syndrome seems to be completely harmless is cold comfort. Like sleep paralysis, it's a condition that can cause us to be anxious to go to sleep, thereby increasing the chances of it happening. Exploding head syndrome is a fascinating and under-discussed condition, and one that seems certain to cling to its mystery for a while longer yet. Thank you for watching, and as always, good luck out there.